So,
We continue today with the 5th chapter of the book of Micah. V'ata beit lechem efrata tza'ir liot balfei Yudah. Mimech li yetzei liot moshel b'Yisrael. Motzotav mikedem mimei olam. So those of you in Bethlehem of Ephrat, the smallest amongst the clans of Yehudah, and this is sort of like King David. David was, of course, from Beit Lechem. And so this is more or less where he was from. And God says they're going to rule over Israel, and that's going to be forever, from old times. And of course, this is talking about the future. And I think we've mentioned in the past that when the second Beit HaMikdash was built, the political leader was Zerubbabel, a direct descendant of David, I believe a grandson of Yechoniah, the king who in the year 597 was exiled along with the nobles, I should say the nobles of Jerusalem were exiled with him to Bavel. Lachein name ad eit yoleda yalada v'yeterachav yishuvun al b'nei Yisrael. God says, God will leave them helpless until she who is to bear has born, and the rest of their children will return to the children of Israel. And again, we talked about this in these chapters in Micah. A lot of the metaphors are to the woman giving birth, the chevlei leida, the pain is going to be painful, there's going to be difficulties, but ultimately you're going to see that child, that is to say, you'll see the return. It will stand, he being the leader of Israel, and shepherd. But how is he going to do it? Through the might of God and the power of God's name. That word Gaon, which you asked me at some point about Mordechai Gaon, which we think of it as a genius like the Vilna Gaon, but we've seen it before about glory, and usually in the context of Bnei Yisrael's lack of Gaon, that is going to be taken away from them. So Bnei Yisrael will dwell securely, etc., etc. V'hayaz, that we're in verse 4. Shalom, Ashur ki yavov artzenu v'chi yidroch b'armenotenu v'hakemonu alav shiva roim u'shmonat nesichei adam. And we will be safe, even if Assyria invades our land. We know that's what happened. They exiled the 10 tribes. They basically destroyed most of Yehudah and were outside of Yerushalayim when the miracle happened during the days of King Chizkiyahu. They'll tread upon our fortresses, but we will set up over their nation 7 shepherds, 8 princes over another nation. We will set up. So the rabbis tried to explain who these 7 shepherds are. It's not such a simple thing to understand. Who these 7 shepherds are. So. The Gemara, it says it's Adam and Seth and Metushelach and Avram and Yaakov and Moshe, and David is in the middle. And who is the 8th? Yishtai, Shmuel. So there's a whole different questions as to who it could be if it's 8, and they enumerate who the 8 is. There's no illusion here as to who it is, but the rabbis try to identify who would be these people. So he will shepherd Assyria's lands with swords. They'll go away, in the land of Nimrod, going back all the way in the early part of the Torah, of course. Nimrod, the great warrior at the time before Abraham, and he will deliver us from Assyria if Syria invades our land or trample our country. The remnant of Jacob will be in the midst of all the people like dew from God, like droplets on the grass, which do not look to anybody nor place their hope in mortals, right? It's going to be something that God is going to support. And so we can rely upon God. It's not like, right, Israel today, the questions, what can they do? What will America allow them to do? What is America going to complain about? The remnant of Jacob will be amongst the nations in the midst of many people like a lion, like a fierce lion among sheep who tramples. Right, and he's in charge. Your hand will prevail over your enemies. Your enemies will be cut down. We're in verse 9. God says on that day, I will destroy the horses in your midst and wreck your chariots. Of course, not referring to wrecking the chariots of Bnei Yisrael. Here we've gone to, of course, it's the chariots of whether it's Egyptians or whether it's the chariots of of the Assyrians. I'll destroy the cities of your land, demolish your fortresses. I'll destroy the sorcery you practice. You shall have no more of these mediums and these soothsayers. I'll destroy the idols. You will no longer worship idols. You will no longer worship the work of hands. Remember back, was it in Yechezkel? Can't remember. It was Yechezkel Yirmiyahu that talks about taking the wood that you take the wood and half of it you use to burn to keep yourself warm, and the other half you build into a idol. How ridiculous it is! Ridiculous is Natashti Asherecha Mikerbech Mishmalati Arech. I'll tear down the Asherah, the sacred post, the feminine god, and destroy your cities. Vasiti ba'af b'chema nakamet hagoyim asher lo shameyu. In anger and wrath, I will wreak retributions on the nations that have not obeyed. So here we see an interesting thing. It's a good question just generally, because one of the seven mitzvot of the seven mitzvot b'nei Noach is idolatry. The nations are not supposed to worship idols. And here God says if they do, and they have done, then God will wreak havoc, A, because of their idolatry, and B, because of the horrors that they have done to Bnei Israel over the ages.